How? It's an impossible timeline. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe, and if you're old here, hello again. My name is Kate Philpott and I cover true crime cases on my channel. Quick little disclaimer, any information I provide here is based off articles, interviews and accounts from people that are involved in the case in some way, and everything I mention is just what I found on the internet and put all into one video. So I apologize if any of those details are inaccurate, but you can't always be sure. This is a case that has totally sucked me in, and I remember watching the documentary on my way home from Australia last year, and it just really stuck with me. And the injustice to this family is honestly infuriating, but there have been recent updates on this case, and it's still possible that there might be movement on it. Before I get into it, I do just want to mention I will be delving pretty deep into themes of suicide. So if that is something that you find too upsetting, I would suggest maybe watching a different video. But the family in this case is so strong. They have done so many media appearances. It's honestly incredible that they still have the strength to keep talking about this and keeping Christian's name alive. And they've literally done an episode of 48 Hours, which only went live like a week ago, maybe, as you're watching this, if even. So they are not giving up anytime soon. So before I get too emotional too quickly, let's get into this case. So this is the case of Christian Andreacchio. Christian was 21 years old when his life was prematurely ended on the 26th of February 2014 as a result of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, or at least that's what we're told to believe.
911, where's your emergency?
Ma'am, we've had a suicide.
You have a suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what's your address?
The Woodland Apartment.
Woodland Apartments? What apartment number?
801.
Alright, who is it, sir?
Christian Andreacchio.
Okay, he's not breathing?
No, ma'am.
So the voice you're hearing on the 911 call is the voice of Dylan Swearingen, and this was a friend of Christian's who was actually in the apartment on the day that Christian died. And the wailing and crying you can hear in the background, that's Whitley Goodman, and Whitley was Christian's girlfriend at the time of his death. The 911 call came through at about 4:30 p.m. and Dylan was saying that he thought Christian shot himself. And to put a long story short, when the officers arrived on the scene that day and conducted their investigation, that's exactly what they concluded too, that it was a suicide. But the evidence, the statements, and a lot more really don't add up to that at all. Instantly, when Christian's parents found out that Christian had killed himself, they thought, no, there is no way, like something is very wrong here. And what comes to my mind first off is, well, a lot of families are going to say that they didn't see it coming and everything. But there are just so many reasons that this just doesn't add up to a suicide. And everyone that knew Christian could see that from the get-go. Except for Dylan and Whitley, who were there that day. But before we get into his death and everything, let's just talk about Christian as a person. The way that people spoke about Christian is like the way anyone would want to be spoken about. He was so well liked. He was just this ray of sunshine for everyone that knew him. He was described as the life of the party, he was very sociable, and he just lifted everyone's spirits around him. Christian's mother's name was Ray and his father's name was Todd, and they had a really good relationship with Christian. According to Ray, Christian was a bit of a flirt, like he would flirt with everyone, old or young, like it didn't matter. He was just that kind of person, but like in a cheeky fun way. He lived in Meridian, Mississippi, and he loved it there. Where the family home was situated was absolutely perfect for him because it was basically right on a lake, and he loved water sports and everything. His parents said that he'd be out like first thing in the morning on his jet ski. And from a relatively young age, he knew he wanted to work on a tugboat. And when he was old enough, that's exactly what he did. So working on a tugboat is basically one of those jobs where you go for like 30 days at a time and you work 6 hours on, 6 hours off the entire time. And Christian was actually really good at this job, and his aspiration was to become the youngest ever captain at Magnolia Marine, which is where he worked. And he was pretty on target for that goal as well. The other good thing about this job for him was that it was making him a lot of money. At 21 years old, he had 2 cars, one of which was a BMW, he had 2 jet skis, he was living out of the home, obviously paying rent and stuff like that, and he had 1 or 2 lockboxes with a ton of cash, as well as 2 pistols. Now, something that wasn't ideal about Christian's life was actually his love life, but in order to understand the dynamic of that, it's best we go back to his previous relationship. So he had been with this girl called Avery for 5 years. Naturally, it was a pretty serious relationship, but these two had an incredible connection. And they just became so intertwined in each other's lives, like they got really close to each other's families and everything like that. But then it got to a point where their lives just didn't work that well together. And it was nothing to do with their connection or, you know, anything fading. It was more just a thing of, well, he was working 30 days at a time on the tugboat, and she was studying for pretty important exams. So when Christian came home, being the social butterfly that he was, he just wanted to go out and party and do all these fun things, but she just wanted to stay in because she was like, well, you know, I have to study, or I have to get up really early to study tomorrow, or whatever the case may be. So unfortunately, it just kind of broke off for that reason. But they did have this understanding that over time, when their lives kind of worked a little better together, that they would get back together, because they were crazy about each other. But it wasn't too long after they broke up that Christian actually got a new girlfriend, and her name was Whitley Goodman. Whitley was 4 years younger than Christian, so she was actually 17 when they were going out. But as a person, to put it nicely, Whitley was a bit of a loose cannon. You know, she partied a lot, she was into drugs, but what's really interesting is even her best friends, like how they described her was not how anyone would want to be described. They would say that she was a liar and a cheater, very manipulative, and just all in all not a very nice person. So when she and Christian started dating, she actually kind of kept to herself a little bit, but she seemed nice. And then she informed Ray and Todd, Christian's parents, about her difficult home life and her background and everything, which, long story short, included her being kicked out of her family home and having absolutely no relationship with her mother, and so on and so forth. So the Andreacchios, being as kind-hearted as they were, they actually ended up taking her in, and she moved in with them for a while. But Whitley was kicked out of their house within less than a month. And this was for a few reasons. First of all, she had been posting some pretty intense stuff on social media, and she knew that Christian's parents could see what she was posting. But literally one of her tweets was $75 left, bath salts or meth. That's intense. She would also go into Christian's parents' or siblings' rooms and just take stuff without asking. Even just going in there alone without asking is like, why would you do that? So there was one occasion where she had actually gone into Ray and Todd's bedroom. Again, already a big red flag. But she actually stole a picture, and this picture was of Christian and Avery, Christian's now ex-girlfriend, because obviously Avery had been a big part of Christian's life and the Andreacchio's life in general. But she then returned this picture to Ray and said, "That's what I think of that." And when Ray looked at this picture, Whitley had, I don't know, poked or stabbed the faces out of the picture. So it was, you could tell it was Christian and Avery, but she literally stabbed the faces out. This is a family that has taken you in and shown you kindness when your own family has kicked you out. Now, also for some reason, Whitley didn't like Alexa being Christian's sister. So she would do things to try and get Alexa in trouble and everything. So Whitley was just manipulating this whole family. But luckily they saw right through it, and like I said, after less than a month, she was kicked out. But even when they did kick her out, she just had this way of worming her way back in. But apparently Christian had blinders when it came to Whitley. He saw past all the toxicity, and I mean, really, they were totally obsessed with each other. And it was actually around the same time that Christian and Whitley started dating that Christian became friends with this other guy called Dylan. And we don't know that much about Dylan, but what we do know is he was kind of shady. Like, one of Christian's longtime friends, he didn't really like the fact that Christian was hanging out with him. So moving on to when Christian moved out of the family home. So 3 months before his death, Christian moved into an apartment in Meridian with Josh, his brother. And Whitley had also basically moved in with them too. And here's how that went. Bearing in mind, she's only 17 at this point, right? So Whitley didn't have a job. She didn't have any responsibilities. They didn't make her pay bills, rent, food, everything was provided. And Christian even allowed her to use his BMW if she needed to get anywhere. And also remember that Christian worked on a tugboat for 30 days at a time, and Josh actually had the same job. So Josh would also work for 30 days at a time. Sometimes they would overlap for weeks, and Whitley would just basically have this free apartment all to herself with no rules, no responsibilities, or need to pay rent or anything. I don't know how she did it, but she just found herself in this really spoiled position. Now, another thing that was probably pretty important to mention, there was an incident a few months before Christian died about a life insurance policy. So basically there had been this accident where Christian had fallen overboard when he was working, and this totally freaked Whitley out because it was around the time that she also had a pregnancy scare. So she went straight to, oh my god, this is such dangerous work, you need to get a life insurance policy because what if I get pregnant and you die? And she really planted that seed in his head, and he kind of was like, yeah, maybe she's right, like this kind of is dangerous work, and he started looking into it. But he actually did have a life insurance policy already, but the beneficiaries of that were his mother, Ray, and actually his ex-girlfriend, Avery, because obviously they had still been together when he got the job, which provided the life insurance policy. But Whitley may have known about that, and I'm sure if she did not like it. Alright, let's get into the lead up to Christian's death. So Christian died on the 26th of February 2014. Josh, Christian's brother, left on the 7th of February to go on the tugboat for 30 days. And before he left, he cleaned the apartment top to bottom. It was absolutely spotless. I know that sounds really insignificant, but that will come back. And then Christian left for a 30-day hitch on the tugboat on the 22nd of February. So this again left Whitley all on her own in the apartment. Now, over the course of the month, Josh and Christian had had several text conversations about Whitley and Christian Whitley's relationship, and basically how the relationship wasn't in a good place, and Christian was thinking, I think I'm ready to break up with her, and all this was going on. But actually on one occasion, around a month before Christian died, there was an incident where Christian was at work on the tugboat, Josh was actually home, and Christian requested that Josh drug tested Whitley, and if she failed, to kick her out. So Josh said, alright, cool. And he basically told Whitley, okay, I'm gonna drug test you. If you fail, I'm gonna kick you out. And she refused to take the drug test. And eventually she just broke down and said, no, I'm gonna fail. You know, I've been taking this drug or that drug. It was then that Josh said, all right, well, you gotta go. So she was kicked out that day. But, you know, as always, she wormed her way back in. She went to Christian and said, I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna stop hanging out with the people I do drugs with and all these what would end up being empty promises. And that's what kind of leads us up to the end of their relationship, or at least Christian and Josh having these conversations about, oh, maybe this isn't gonna go on any longer. Because there was even a bit of talk of Christian leaving Meridian and breaking up with Whitley and moving somewhere else. To add insult to injury, Whitley was also hanging out with this guy who was known to be a drug dealer in the local area. What hanging out means, I don't know exactly, but... And just before Christian left on the 22nd of February, he and Whitley had an argument, and after this argument he told her, while I'm gone, don't use my car. So moving forward to the 25th of February, this is the day before Christian's death. So Dylan calls Christian over and over again, basically bringing him all these problems, like Whitley's driving around in your car, she's going around with some guy. And at this point, Christian was just so sick of all the drama, so he actually decided to come home from work in order to break up with Whitley once and for all. But obviously when you're working on a tugboat and you're gone for 30 days at a time, it's not exactly just easy to come home from work. So he did make up this excuse that there was a family emergency and that his mom and dad were having a fight and his mom was kicking his dad and his sister out, and that he needed to get home and sort that out. And he got permission to leave on the basis that he would return by 5:30 p.m. the following day. Alright, here's where things get very juicy. Grab a coffee or something. Seriously. Because this is Dylan's account of the 26th of February, the day Christian died. So Christian called Dylan at 1:37 a.m. for a lift home. Now, bear in mind, Christian was at work. He was actually in New Orleans at the time, so this is like a 3-4 hour drive away from Meridian. And Dylan left at around 3:45, 4 a.m. So Dylan had to drive basically in the middle of the night from Meridian to New Orleans, pick Christian up, and then back to Meridian. So it was around 8 a.m. when he picked Christian up. And on the way back in the car, he says that's when he found out that Christian and Whitley were having relationship issues. I'll come back to that. So finally, Christian and Dylan arrived back at the apartment at about 11:30 a.m. Christian and Whitley ended up getting into a massive argument, which is not all that surprising considering Christian was going home to kick her out and break up with her. But that's when things got really intense, and Christian ended up pulling a gun out, pointing it at his head and saying, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" So Whitley said yes and was trying to grab the gun off him. And after a while, things calmed down and the three of them decided to watch a movie. And I know that seems a bit like all of a sudden we went from 100 to absolutely 0. But that's literally what Dylan's statement says. So, moving on. It was sometime around then that Dylan actually took Christian's gun and hid it because he didn't want Christian to kind of lose control again. So he hid it behind a curtain. So Dylan then offered to get the three of them some food. And that's when Christian asked if he would get Chick-fil-A. And he also made another request that is unusual to say the least. He gave Dylan his bank card and said, "Go take all the money out of my account." So Dylan was like, "Are you sure?" And Christian was like, "Yeah, go for it." Anyway, don't worry, we'll get to the part where we pull all this apart. And in one of those earlier arguments, Christian actually broke Whitley's phone, so Dylan offered to go and get it repaired. So according to Dylan, he went out to do all these bits about an hour after he and Christian originally got home. But not so surprisingly, Dylan couldn't get all the money out of Christian's account because first of all, he wasn't Christian, and second of all, he didn't have the PIN. And this is when Dylan calls a friend he had that worked at the bank. So eventually Dylan gets home and the three of them sit down to watch another movie. He says Christian and Whitley went for a drive and to talk things out, and that's when Dylan fell asleep for 2 hours. So when he woke up, Christian and Whitley were back from their drive. Whitley was in one of the bedrooms taking a nap, and Christian was sitting on the couch smoking a cigarette. And that's when Dylan said he was going to go to Best Buy to go talk to someone about car speakers. And as he was leaving to go to Best Buy, he took the gun that he had hidden earlier on in the day and he actually gave it back to Christian. And he just said, "Unload it and do not use it." So when he gets back from Best Buy, this is when he notices Christian isn't in the living room where he left him. So he starts calling for Christian to see if he's there. And then he notices that the upstairs bathroom light was on. So he presumes that Christian is maybe taking a shower or something, and he goes up and knocks on the door and asks, "Are you all right?" But there was no answer, so he went downstairs to get Whitley, and he said, "Listen, Whitley, Christian isn't answering me, like we need to go check on him." This is when Whitley went back to sleep and Dylan went back upstairs to check on Christian himself. Again, he knocked and asked if Christian was okay, but he still got no answer. And then he opened the door, finding Christian lying over the bathtub with his head and shoulders in the bath in a pool of blood. So instantly he shouts out, "Whitley, Christian is dead, we need to call 911. So Whitley screamed, ran upstairs and started holding Christian. Eventually, of course, the police arrived and they asked Dylan and Whitley to sit on the couch in the living room. Alright, it's time to tear the absolute living Jesus Christ out of this statement because, I've been biting my tongue just saying the facts without like going in on them. Let's go. First of all, wasn't Christian only coming home from work because Dylan had been repeatedly calling him saying that there was issues with Whitley? So how is Dylan now saying that he only knew there were issues in their relationship on the way home in the car? Christian was away from the situation, not knowing if there were issues with Whitley, and only for Dylan calling him and telling him did he know. So like, how? Second of all, why would Christian just say, "Oh, take all my money"? Now maybe you could argue that Christian would say something like this if he was planning on killing himself. But what I find interesting about that is when Dylan was at the bank and couldn't get into Christian's account because he didn't have the PIN, wouldn't Dylan just call Christian for the PIN instead of calling his friend who worked at the bank? You know, you might have another chance at getting into the account if you actually get the PIN from the account holder. Also, I'm not sure if this is obvious or anything, but this timeline makes 0 sense. Like, it's impossible. Let me tell you why. So, Christian and Dylan get home at 11:30 a.m. Dylan is then spotted on CCTV at 12:30 p.m. at the bank. This bank was a 10-15 minute drive away, and he also has a receipt time-stamped 1:06 p.m. for Chick-fil-A. So they get home at 11:30, and between 11:30 and 12:15 or 12:20, whenever Dylan left for the bank, they were supposed to watch a whole movie, which would have been, 90 minutes, and Christian and Whitley were meant to have that big fight where Christian was holding a gun to his head and everything. How could that all happen in 45 minutes? Like, there's no way. And also, that part aside, if you just look at the whole day in general, allegedly, according to Dylan, the three of them watched 2 movies together, And Dylan had also taken a 2-hour nap. So if we say that each movie was like 90 minutes long, even if realistically they could have been even longer, that would be 3 hours for movies plus 2 hours for Dylan's nap. And they got home at 11:30, so that 2 plus 3 hours brings you to 4:30, which is exactly when 911 was called. And that's not even including the big argument between Christian and Whitley, Dylan's trip to the bank or Chick-fil-A, or to get Whitley's phone fixed, or Dylan's trip to Best Buy. How? It's an impossible timeline. Also, just gonna refer back to the gun that Dylan had previously hidden on Christian, and the fact that Dylan gave it back to Christian and said, unload it and don't touch it. Why give it back? If you were worried about it only an hour or two before, why give it back? This question crossed authorities' minds as well, so when they asked him this, he said, well, I couldn't take it with me to Best Buy. And that in itself is problematic, because you didn't take it earlier to the bank and to get Whitley's phone fixed and to Chick-fil-A, so like, why take it out of its hiding spot? It doesn't make sense. Like, just leave it there. You don't have to take it with you. Unfortunately, there's also no confirmation that he ever even went to Best Buy. And of course, by the time investigators went and looked for CCTV, it was already gone, because they did not do that straight away. Another thing with Dylan's statement. Instantly, when he notices Christian isn't in the living room and he sees the bathroom light on upstairs, he knocks and asks, are you alright? Wouldn't you only ask that if you already had a concern? If you were actually just looking for your friend, like, I mean, first of all, you probably wouldn't bother them if you thought they were in the shower. Second of all, wouldn't you be like, hey, are you in there? Or like, something less concerned? Why would you instantly go to, are you alright? I don't know how I feel about that. And another part about that, if he was in the shower, wouldn't you hear the shower? I've never come across a shower that you couldn't hear from the outside of the bathroom. And this was a small apartment as well. It's not like they were really far away from each other or anything like that. So, and lastly, although I probably could even go on, he just kind of assumed straight away that Christian was dead. Like, he didn't even think to like check a pulse or like, you know, check if Christian was breathing. He didn't even walk into the bathroom. He just said, Whitley, Christian's dead, we have to call 911. Now, I wasn't there, so maybe there was enough blood for it to be pretty obvious that Christian was dead, but I just find that, like, it's just another little thing. It's just all these little things just add up to paint a really strange picture. Alright, so that was interesting. How about we get into Whitley's statement now? So on Saturday the 22nd of February, this would have been the day that Christian left for work, Whitley went to a Mardi Gras party with her family. And she says it was around 1 p.m. that day that Christian stopped talking to her. She said that he always had trust issues and that he would much prefer her to be at home alone and missing him than actually out enjoying her life. Because of this, she was considering breaking up with him, but she thought, you know what, maybe it's salvageable. It was the 25th of February, the day before Christian's death, that he called her and said that he was quitting his job and coming home. I'll come back to that. Now, Whitley doesn't give what time Christian and Dylan got back, but she does mention that they did go out for a drive at one point. And they went to Bonita and talked out their issues, and he said that between her and his mom that he couldn't make anyone happy. When they got home, she went for a nap with her dog in one of the bedrooms, and then she woke up to Dylan saying that Christian was dead, and she went upstairs to see him in a pool of blood. And that's it. That's her whole statement. Alright, let's look at these inconsistencies, because there are some. First of all, notice the sheer lack of detail in this statement. She wastes so much time explaining her issues and like trust, and like, I didn't go into the exact details, but she literally said like, you know, a relationship isn't a relationship without trust and this and that, and like, this is not about that. It's about like, what did you do the night before and the day of? Like, what did you experience? And she gives so little detail on those things. Secondly, what about the 2 movies they watched? No? Like, that would be a whole 3 hours of your day. Surely that would stick out as a memory. No? Like, where did they go? Also, what about Dylan leaving and going to Chick-fil-A and the bank and to get her phone fixed? And then what about Dylan going to Best Buy like a few hours later? Like, did none of these things happen? Or is she just like... Also, you would expect that the part about getting her phone fixed would be like quite an important part. And speaking of which, her phone was apparently broken because of an argument she had had with Christian earlier that day, but she mentions no arguments. But according to Dylan, Christian was pointing a gun at his head, saying, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" And she was trying to pull the gun away, saying, "Yes, I do love you." Did she just, like, forget to include that part? Also, what about her being kicked out? Because according to Dylan, that's the whole reason Christian was coming home. Also, according to her, Christian was quitting his job? Sorry? Christian loved his job. Christian's main goal at that point in his life was to become the youngest captain at Magnolia Marine. So why would he just quit his job? That doesn't make any sense. But then, according to the actual company that he worked for, they said no, he definitely was due back at 5:30 p.m. that day. And he had agreed to that. Also, the fact that Whitley was asleep having a nap during the time that Christian allegedly shot himself, she claims that she was on Xanax and that's why the gunshots didn't wake her up. But then when Dylan came in and was like, "Hey, like, Christian killed himself," she woke up straight away. That was some phenomenal Xanax, because that gunshot, according to experts, would have been heard up to 3 apartments down. But like, how could you just wake up so naturally and so easily when Dylan comes to wake you up? I don't know. So this is just based off what she said to the police. But what she told friends was something different. She actually told her friends that she woke up to the gunshot. And that's when she went to check on Christian and found him dead. But according to what she told the police, it was Dylan that found him dead, not her. So how did she wake up? And who found Christian? Was it Dylan or was it Whitley? And when the police asked Whitley, had Christian ever mentioned hurting himself or killing himself, she said, "I don't think so." But what about literally earlier that day when, according to Dylan anyway, Christian was holding a gun to his head and saying, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" I would consider that exactly what the police would be looking for in that scenario. And according to Whitley's mother, only recently, there had been another very similar incident only a few months before Christian's death, where he was holding a gun to his head and saying, "Do you love me?" So how does it make sense for her to say, "I don't think so"? This whole case, man, this is just a mess. Now, interestingly, when Whitley was being questioned, she actually had Christian's phone on her. And when they found that out, the police were like, "Listen, we need that phone." And she refused to give it to them. And then they told her, "Well, listen, if you don't give us that phone, like, you're not getting out of here. Like, we will keep you here until you give us that phone." So finally, after a lot of persuasion, might I add, she finally gave up the phone. But like, why hide it? Anything? What have you got to hide? Now, some people say that she just didn't want to give it up because of potentially sexually explicit photos or texts or, you know, stuff like that. But in a situation where the supposed love of your life has committed suicide, I think you can put that kind of stuff aside. Like, and there's something else. We don't even know if Whitley or Dylan had blood on them that day, because they weren't even photographed. And yes, they were questioned, but they weren't interrogated. And I honestly think if there had been pressure applied regarding 1, 2, or any of those inconsistencies I mentioned before, who knows, like, it could be a totally different story. Long story short, their accounts of the night made no sense, but they weren't even properly interrogated on it. Now, what was done on the 26th of February, which I find very interesting, is the gunshot residue test. Christian, Whitley, and Dylan all had gunshot residue tests done that day. And before Whitley even did it, she was like, "Well, mine's gonna come back positive." So they were like, "What? Why?" And she said that actually the night before she had been out with a few guys and they had been shooting guns. But even if this was the case, like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because gunshot residue is not going to stay on your hands that long. Like, they kind of estimate it would stay on your hands maybe 4 to 6 hours, and even at that, it's if you don't like wipe off much things. Like, if you don't wash your hands or shower or anything like that. But there's even more to say about that night that she had allegedly been shooting guns, so I'll get back to that in a little bit. Interestingly, Dylan's gunshot residue test also came back positive. He didn't really have any good reason. He didn't really have an excuse. But the fact that they both had gunshot residue on their hands, that suggests that they were in the room that Christian was shot in when he was shot. Now, according to both of their statements, neither of them were in the room. It's just that the evidence suggests otherwise. And with Christian's gunshot residue, he had gunshot residue on the inside of his right hand and the outside of his left hand. But Christian was right-handed, so if he shot himself, his right hand would have been around the gun. So how is the gunshot residue gonna go on the palm of his right hand? And even if it was gonna go on the palm of his right hand, wouldn't it also go on the outside of his right hand? So that's some of the sketchiness. Yeah, I'm not even done. But that's some of the sketchiness of this case, and unfortunately, I'm gonna have to leave it there for part 1. I recently posted on my Instagram stories that I got a new camera, but the lens is still on the way. It hasn't arrived yet, and it's like back ordered, so I'm not gonna get it for ages. Just so frustrating because I just want to use my camera. And so with that, I'm still filming on my phone, unfortunately, which means I can't have like a really long video, because it just can't handle it. So come back in exactly 24 hours and I'll have part 2 up and we can get into Matt's statement. Matt being the guy who Whitley was apparently out shooting guns with the night before Christian's death. The crime scene, which is a massive part of this case. The theory that Christian might have died over 4 hours prior to the 911 call being made, and new updates on this case. So thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like and comment down below what your thoughts were. And don't look up any spoilers, because I've tried really hard to get all of this information into an order that makes sense. So you'll only confuse yourself more if you don't wait till tomorrow. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at KatePhilpott_YT. And until then, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye guys.